We've got a lot of CPU stuff going on right now. We're revisiting the R7 3700X today and the R5 3600. We first reviewed these CPUs in July of 2019, so somehow it's already been 5 years. And AMD Zen 5 CPUs are coming out in just a couple of weeks. It's going to be July 31st for the official release date. We will have reviews of them. And so ramping up for all that, we've got a ton of new data, and we wanted to do some quick revisits along the way as we start building out the charts and prepping for those reviews. So we would recommend, first of all, just waiting until the Zen 5 launch. So you might as well just wait and see how it does before you buy anything. But either way, this will get you up to speed on where those CPUs are today. This testing features an entirely new test suite. It has new games in it. Has a lot of new data. But as far as the big overhaul for games, that includes Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail, which is a brand new update, major update to the game. Dragon's Dogma 2, which is a 2024 release. Starfield for 2023. Baldur's Gate 3, 2023 as well. And we've brought back some others. This video will help lay the groundwork for the reviews through the rest of the year, though. So let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermalright and the Frozen Prism 360 liquid cooler. Thermalright's Frozen Prism is one of the most affordable liquid coolers on the market and is able to achieve competitive results with a high cold plate convexity that applies pressure centrally to the silicon area based on our testing. This works on both AMD and Intel. We previously benchmarked the Frozen Prism and found that it's overall competitive for its price point. The cooler comes in a few color variations. It has a blackout option and an RGB option, and it's the cheapest liquid cooler we've tested anytime recently that still hits performance markers. Learn more at the link in the description below. Some really quick history first. The 3700X is an 8-core, 16-thread part. There was a 3800X. It was basically a clock bump. And then the 3600 was the 6-core, 12-thread part that we generally recommended. There was a 3600X as well. We don't have that in this data set. We have, I think it was 35 CPUs that we've run in just the last week alone, which as a side note, it has been awesome to see the payoff of all this effort we've put into in process optimization, automation over the years, and the manual testing processes have improved as well where those exist. And so everything's just improved to where we can run 30 plus CPUs through benches in a week without it being a crazy week. So anyway, there's a ton in here, but the 3600X is not one of them. In general, the Ryzen 1000 through 3000 series, especially the X versus non-X variants, were not too terribly different. And where there were meaningful differences, you could really easily overclock the non-X to hit X SKU performance, especially in those early days. It was often a 5-10 minute overclock if you had even a little bit of knowledge about what you were doing, and you can just get that performance for free. So the thing we used to say with the 2600, the 3600, and then their X variants, 1600 as well, was you're basically paying $50 for a letter, because it was that easy to tune it, and in a lot of cases there weren't huge changes. Some more historical context too, the R5s, the 1600, 2600, 3600 were increasingly competitive generationally with Intel. So that first round, and even the Ryzen 2000 series, AMD's best area of competition was in production workloads, so things that were heavily multi-threaded. They did okay in gaming, but Intel was largely still doing well there. It was the main reason to buy Intel was for gaming. This was towards the end of that era of an i5 is enough for gaming, and then that kind of got redeveloped as things like the 10600K, the 8600K to some extent shipped and were reasonably performant at their price points, and then AMD with the R5s. The biggest reason to buy an R7 over an R5 at the time with the launch pricing would have been if you're a user who did some level of heavily multi-threaded production workloads, things like rendering for tile-based rendering. So for prices, the 3700X price originally was $330. The 3600 was actually a shocking today $200, the non-X, which was actually incredible. This was when AMD's R5s were regularly getting our recommendation just because of how fierce they were on price, and that's kind of gone away in recent years. But either way, for gaming at the time, for a lot of use cases, it made sense to buy the 3600 rather than the 3700X, with again that exception of if you wanted to do some more heavily multi-threaded non-gaming workloads. Now, the 3700X went a little crazy later in its life because in 2020, 2021 especially, it was regularly available for around $260. And then I think it dropped even lower than that towards the end of that life cycle. So it really made itself relevant as the price came down, and it shifted to where we started recommending it somewhat regularly with that price drop. AMD's closest competition from Intel at the time was pretty fierce. In the first Zen launch, there were early teething issues that they were working out. Ironically, today, that's flipped. Now Intel is the one that seems to have some massive stability problems and platform maturity problems. But either way, the 2700, the 2700X, we're fighting the 8000 series. That would include the 8700K. We're doing a revisit of that next, so check back for that one, and the 9900K. And then the 3000 series was fighting what was left of the end of the 8000 series plus the incoming 9000 series. And again, those are in the next piece. For today's revisit, we are primarily reestablishing the benchmarks. This is really just us saying, hey, we gotta start putting everything together for the Zen 5 reviews, hopefully get you something useful too. But also, we're looking at in-socket upgrades for the 3000 series CPUs that we're revisiting, just the two of them today, and also talking about what it might look like if you were to do a total platform overhaul, what kind of your max gain is. So, all right, enough of that. Those are the things we're focusing on. Our production workloads, we'll look at non-X3D comparisons as well, like the 5950X. And then for now, we're gonna go through the, whatever it is, high 20s, low 30s of CPUs in these charts. And if there is a specific CPU you'd like to see us run for the Zen 5 reviews, leave a comment below. If it's not already in the charts, there's effectively infinite CPUs. We don't have all of them. There's a lot of choices we make about if we're going to test an X versus non-X or K versus non-K, things like that. But leave your requests. And then, of course, the most relevant ones we will try to get in here before the Zen 5 reviews. Probably the 10 series is pretty important. And we're working on the 1000 series at AMD as well. But anyway, let's get into the testing. We'll start with some gaming benchmarks. Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail is one of the newest updates to our benchmark suite and is from 2024. This benchmark just came out recently and brought with it major optimizations and new graphics to the game. The 3700X ran at 177 FPS average with strongly positioned 1% lows relative to the average and overall consistent frame-to-frame delivery. The 3700X ranks just below the 1200F in this particular test, with the 3600 just below the 3700X. This is consistent with reviews of the original launch, including ours, which back then were that the 3600 and the R5 series had supplanted the i5s for the old mantra, an i5 is enough for gaming, now becoming an R5 is enough for gaming, or at least at that time. Compared to the R5 2600, the 3600 is 14% ahead. The 2700 trails from its reduced frequency and underutilized cores. Anyone upgrading in-socket would be best equipped with the $183 R7 5700X3D. We reviewed that somewhat recently. The 5800X3D is technically superior, but in places we were able to still find it in stock, it was often double the price of the 5700X3D. The 5600X3D has a 300 MHz higher boost clock than the 5700X3D, so in this situation it does better by 7.5%. It isn't widely available though. If you were to move to the 7800X3D at 363 FPS and an entirely new platform, ignoring the pending 9000 series CPUs, the uplift would be about 106% from the 3700X and 109% from the 3600. At 1440p, despite increasing the GPU load, we still ended up with scaling lower down the stack. The 3600 and 3700X would still benefit from upgrades, although realistically both of these CPUs are perfectly fine in this test. The 3700X and 3600 are about the same as at 1080p since the CPU is still fully loaded. The 5700X3D would give an uplift of 50% from the 3700X and 54% from the 3600. The 5800X3D does a little bit better, but the top of this chart is getting squashed for scaling by the additional load of 1440p. The 7800X3D's 273 FPS average posts a similar 54 to 58% lead from these CPUs, limited again by GPU scaling. Baldur's Gate 3 launched to critical acclaim in 2023. At 1080p medium, scaling is fairly clean all the way up the stack. Memory posts an uplift in this game, with the DDR5 6400 7800X3D result climbing 3.8% from the standard test, and the 14900K climbing 5% with DDR5 7200. The 3700X ran at 68.5 FPS average, with lows paced proportionally well, leading the 3600 by about 8% in averages. Upgrading the 3700X to a 5700X3D would yield a 59% uplift, or 73% to the 5800X3D. The 3600 would gain 71 or 86% to these same two options. Moving to a new platform, and the 7800X3D would improve by 93% from the 3700X and 108% from the 3600. Dragon's Dogma 2 was a mess at launch. It's received patches, and it's still somewhat of a mess, but that makes it a great CPU benchmark. This is a 2024 title. We have a whole separate piece on it if you want to learn more about the sort of independent methodology of this specific game. At 1080p high and tested in the same city we used for our standalone piece, the R7 3700X ran at 61 FPS average, about the same as the 3600's 59.6 FPS average. Lows are overall okay, although we still see some animation stutter in this title for all the tests. The 5800X3D posts a 98 FPS average, leading the 3700X and 3600 by 60 to 65%. The cheaper 5700X3D is 55 to 59% ahead of these CPUs. A 7800X3D boosts that to 78 to 83%. The 14900K is at least more competitive here than it was in some other tests, but it still doesn't match the performance of the 7800X3D, and it carries with it too much uncertainty with Intel's recent problems. Starfield is up next. This one was a 2023 release. At 1080p low, the 3700X ran at 84 FPS average, leading the 3600 by a more noteworthy 17% in this title. The extra cores seem to at least help in this one between these two CPUs in this game. The 5700X3D leads these CPUs at 121 FPS average, establishing a 44% uplift over the 3700X and about 68% over the 3600. The 5800X3D pushes that further, but isn't worth the added cost based on prices we're seeing right now. The 7800X3D at 152.7 FPS average leads the 3700X by 83% and the 3600 by 114%. Intel's best option would predictably be the 14900K, but until we know what's causing the failures of these CPUs, we can't recommend them in any capacity. Intel's lack of transparency means a lack of certainty and confidence for the public. F124 is up next. This one came out in 2024. Frame rate is high in this game. There's a ton of room for CPU scaling with minimal GPU overhead using 1080p high, so this allows us to see the impact of CPUs to total performance. The 3700X ran at 212 FPS average. Realistically, this is obviously completely playable, but we use these tests to look at the relative scaling performance. The 3700X led the 3600 by just 3% here, and is ahead of the R7 2700 by 24%. The 5700X3D is about 68% ahead of the 3700X, with the 5600X3D outperforming the 5700X3D in this test as a result of the former's higher boost frequency. If you live near a micro center, the 5600X3D could still make sense, but it comes down to pricing. The 5800X3D is meaningfully ahead here, up at 400 FPS average and leading the 5700X3D by 12%. As for the 7800X3D, that pathway would more than double the frame rate of the 3700X and 3600. We did not measure an uplift from the memory change in this title, though. Intel's 14900K is the closest Intel competition, but underperforms against the 5800X3D. Notably, Intel's 0.1% lows are generally advantaged over AMD's in this specific game. However, variance is also high for lows in this title. 1440p trims the top end as a result of the increased GPU load, but the lower half of the chart remains mostly unchanged. Other than reducing the percent gain from the 3700X and 3600 to the higher end parts as a result of the nearer GPU bind, this is pretty much the same, so let's move on. The next test is for simulation time rather than frames per second. We're using Stellaris, a 2016 4X game that has received continual updates and seems to be pretty well liked. Despite its age, this is one of the more useful CPU metrics as it shows a real-world time-based performance, similar to what we see in production benchmarks. You can see a tangible impact to how long you'd wait for simulation to complete before you're able to do stuff again. In this one, the 3700X outperformed the 3600 with its 49-second result on average, a reduction from the 53-second result of about 7%. The 7800X3D posts a 42% reduction in simulation time at 28.5 seconds to 49.4 on the 3700X. Intel does okay here, with the 14900K about tied with the 7700X and 14700K. There's just no meaningful difference between these three CPUs. Upgrading the memory on Intel slightly improved its result, though. Rainbow Six Siege remains in our test cycle for its CPU-heavy programming. This is a 2015 game, and it's the oldest in our suite currently, but it has received continual updates. It's also interesting because Intel maintains the top rank for our testing in this game. The 14900K with faster memory ran at 684 FPS average, with the 14900K and 13900K on the standardized memory next. The 7800X3D is a few ranks down and between the 13700K and 14700K. As for the subjects of our revisit today, the 3700X ran at 364 FPS average, ahead of the 3600 by about 3%. The lead over the 2700 and 2600 is significant. If you're on a 1000 or 2000 series Ryzen chip and you're okay with used options, it might make sense to spend under $70 on one of these parts for a cheap upgrade. The 5800X3D and 5600X3D both benefit from their clock boost over the 57X3D, and that's enough games for now, so let's move on to production workload. Blender 4.1.1 is up first, tested using our GN logo render. This is an unrelenting all-core workload. The 3700X is able to leverage its extra cores over the 3600 here, landed at 20 minutes to complete the render versus 26 on the 3600. That's a noteworthy reduction in time requirement of 22.5%. The AM4X3D CPUs don't benefit from their extra cache in this particular test. More cores does, however, benefit them, followed by higher frequency. The cache doesn't come into play much. The 7950X is currently the chart leader, followed by the 4900K from Intel. The best in-socket upgrades for someone primarily doing work like this with a 3700X or 3600 would be the 5950X or even the 3950X if there's a significant price difference. If leaving the socket, almost anything modern would be an upgrade. In 7-zip compression, the 3700X completed 78,000 MIPS, or millions of instructions per second, which had it similar to the 5600X3D and 5600X. The 5800X leads the 3700X by 20%. Compared to the 3600, 3700X owners benefit from a 28% uplift. Upgrading in socket for this specific type of work would be best done with a 5950X or a 3950X. At the top of the chart, the 7950X and 14900K are similar in performance. In decompression, the 3700X has a larger 35% lead over the R5 3600. An in-socket upgrade to the 5950X would yield a 117% improvement from the 3700X, getting most of the performance afforded by modern CPUs like the 7950. The 7950X extends beyond the 5950X with an improvement of 24%, of course at the cost of a new platform. We're moving to the Puget suite for Adobe software. In Photoshop, the overall score doesn't heavily skew towards high core count CPUs. It still favors a mix of core count and frequency, as evidenced by the positioning of the 5600X3D and the 5800X3D. The 3700X posts a score of 7,000 points, where higher is better, and is a representation of time taken for various filters, transforms, and other tasks. That has it 6% ahead of the 3600. The in-socket 5800X3D gives an uplift of 25% over the 3700X. The 7950X is a huge jump of 54% over the 3700X, though the gaming gains we saw earlier were generally larger for the 7000 series. Adobe Premiere allows Intel to take the lead. The 14900K and 13900K solutions lead the 7950X, followed by the 14700K and then the 7900X. Intel is definitely stronger here than it was in most other tests. The 3700X had an extended score of 6613 points, boosted over the 3600's 5895 by 12%. The 7800X3D produces a similar result to the 5950X. In this workload, the 7800X3D doesn't carry the same advantages as it does in gaming. Now for Chromium Code Compile, also measured in time, and lower is better. The best result on our new chart is the 7950X3D at 73 minutes, followed with invariance by the 14900K at 75 minutes. The worst on the chart is the G7400. We won't expand the scale to accommodate this one, because it's a one-off. The bar breaks the chart, but if we were to expand it, it would show 619 minutes. A more reasonable worst would be the 2600 down at 311 minutes. For the 3700X, the result is still okay at 180 minutes. The 3600 required 229 minutes to complete the compile, meaning the 3700X time requirement is 21% lower than the 3600's. Like in Premiere, Intel does better in this one than some other tests, but AMD still has the technical chart lead. The in-socket 5950X would bring a huge 80-minute reduction in time required from the 3700X. Okay, so wrapping up on this, the 3700X has held on pretty well in production workloads. Obviously, both of these parts have aged a lot. It's expected. It's been 5 years, and there's a lot of better options out there. AM4 remains sort of surprisingly relevant with things like the 5800X3D, or by better price comparison to the 5700X3D in gaming workloads. So if you are a gaming-centric user, and that is the primary thing you care about, and you really want to save money, then the 5700X3D at 160 to 180 or so dollars, depending on where you find it. When you buy it, it seems like it's about 183 right now. But anyway, that might make sense for you if that's the only thing you're really changing. And in terms of a heatsink, for the most part, it's really not much more difficult to cool than whatever else you might have in their lower end than that. So in-socket upgrades, that makes the most sense. We like the 5800X3D. It does seem like it's getting more difficult to find at a reasonable price, though. It's in the 300s. That's kind of getting into maybe consider new platform territory. Still cheaper, but yeah, it's pushing it a little bit these days, especially with the age of AM4. Still relevant, though. Getting into some of the second-hand parts. So this is kind of interesting, but it's difficult to gauge because it's different all around the world. So if you have something like a 3600, you might consider 5000 series part. We'd recommend going and looking on your local secondhand marketplace, Facebook Marketplace, eBay, things like that. Check for 5000 series parts as a potential upgrade pathway, because if you can get one used for, say, 70 bucks, that might be the best route, short of going up to a 5700X3D for just kind of the max modern in-socket, but still affordable. So barring the 58X3D part, to keep the platform alive. And then otherwise, for new stuff, the 7800X3D if you're staying on AMD, but we're going to see how 9000 series does. Maybe it knocks some things loose and changes some of the pricing, so we'd recommend holding off if you're going new. And then for Intel, genuinely, I just don't feel comfortable recommending any modern Intel parts right now until there's more transparency on what the hell is going on with their platform stability and longevity issues, because it seems to be getting worse. So I don't feel comfortable recommending them right now. Maybe if enough people feel that way, Intel will actually do or say something about it, but we're still looking into that separately as well. If we were to ignore those issues, then I mean, anything's an upgrade on 14 series, 7000 series. So 14700K might kind of make sense if you were on a 3700X previously. It is somewhat similar in price class. You're going to pay more on memory, on the board. Everything's more expensive, but otherwise we'll kind of leave it there for now and just see what develops with Intel. So one more thing I'd like to try and add whenever we do these revisits. So these CPUs are still pretty damn good. And a lot of people get really caught up in new launches and the desire to upgrade because it's not the best anymore. Couple things. First of all, if you want to upgrade because it's fun and it's something you want to do and you want a new computer, you just want to do something fun with computers, go for it. If, however, you're pretty happy with the performance right now and you're just finding yourself getting caught up in the consumers and buying cycle, then the quick kind of reality check that I like to encourage is evaluate the applications you run right now on your computer, and if you're pretty happy with it and you can't explicitly point to something to say, I don't like the way this is working, then just maybe keep using the parts that you have. If there are games or applications or whatever where you are unhappy with the performance, that's a great reason to consider an upgrade. But just I like to remind the audience of that, because sometimes it's easy to forget that these chips, like, they are still really good. It is kind of impressive how good they still are. And so it really just depends on if you're using stuff that pushes these to their limits or not. And probably a lot of people are able to get a little bit more life out of them if they wanted to. Anyway, I like to throw that in there for all these revisits just as a quick reminder of how good the stuff typically still is, even after a couple years. That's it for this one. Just a really quick, simple, kind of fun revisit and historical look back, and prepping for the Zen 5 reviews coming up. Check back soon. We have the 8700K and 9900K revisits. And if you want to see other stuff, let us know. It's more of a matter of how much can fit on the charts than it is anything else at this point. So we'll have to make some cuts for the reviews because the charts get too dense. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly by buying something like one of our shirts, our PC building anti-static mod mats, or you can grab our solder and project mats. Also, patreon.com/gamersnexus to throw us a few bucks and help us out with our benchmarking. We'll see you all next time.